back to Murderous Minds Monday, where we cover the most sadistic and evil serial killers, mass killers, just murderers in general of the modern day. Today's case we are going to be covering Arthur Hutchinson, the most notorious killer in British history. He is still in prison. He is one of the longest serving prisoners in the British system. So he is nicknamed himself the Fox. So we're going to go over his early life, his crimes and his jail time, see what we think of this case and come to a conclusion at the end as to whether we think he is serving his time as he should. So if you want to hear more about the crimes of Arthur Hutchinson, aka the Fox, then just keep on watching. Arthur Hutchinson was born in Hartlepool, which is in the northeast of England, on the 19th of February 1941. His mother's name was Louise and he was one of 6 children. He was brought up in a housing estate called Owen Manor, which was just on the edge of Hartlepool. And from an early age, he displayed a lot of signs of being very aggressive and having a taste for extreme violence. When he was just 7 years old, he stabbed one of his sisters with scissors. He apparently was picked on by his siblings, but we're not 100% sure what provoked him to stab his sister with scissors. There's nothing that could explain this sort of violence, especially in a 7-year-old. However, from an early age, Arthur's mother taught him that he could do no wrong, that he was never in trouble, and she would always forgive him. He was very much what you would call a mummy's boy. So this incident with his sister was just the first of many that happened at such an early age. He was involved in several incidents of bullying and assaulting younger children. By the age of 11, he faced his first appearance in juvenile court on a charge of indecent assault. And what followed was just a pattern of petty crimes such as theft and also having sex with underage girls, so rape. He would also walk around holding a 5-foot stick, which he would threaten people with and tell people that he could kill them with one blow from this stick. The people that he also worked with around this time, so as he's growing up, just felt uneasy around him all the time. No one ever felt very comfortable around him. At the age of 18, he married his neighbour, Margaret Dover, who was actually pregnant with his child at the time of their marriage. He treated her so badly. He was a serial adulterer, so slept with multiple women while he was married to Margaret. He would often brag about his conquests with other women, and he saw himself as a bit of a ladies' man. So no one else saw him as this, but he sort of gave himself this title of a ladies' man, that he was able to get any woman he wanted and any woman would sleep with him. His first marriage to Margaret only lasted 3 years before the couple separated, and he was then imprisoned through the early 1960s for having sex with underage girls. He then met his second wife, who was just called Hanlaw, I think that's her surname, at a Christmas party in 1968. The two dated for a very short time, and within 5 months they were married. However, this marriage was no different to his previous marriage. He was still a serial adulterer. There was still lots of violence in the home, and it was just ever present that he was not committed to one person. There isn't much known about his life throughout the 1970s, but it is known that from 1971 onwards, he was convicted of further sexual assaults, or not convicted, he was accused of further sexual assaults. And he also served more than 5 years in prison for firearms offences and for attempting to shoot dead his half-brother Dino. However, not long after his release from prison for this offence, he found himself in police custody again, this time on charges of theft, burglary and for a brutal rape. By now it's 1983 and Arthur had not faced trial for any of the crimes he had committed. He'd spent time in prison for them, but none of them had actually amounted to anything. On the 23rd of September 1983, he was at Selby Magistrates Court in North Yorkshire to stand trial for the cases that he had previously been charged with. However, Arthur hatched a plan at this time. He didn't want to go down for these charges. He didn't believe that he should be there. So he asked the police officers who were in charge of him if he could go to the toilet and if they could take off the handcuffs so that he could do this. As soon as the handcuffs were taken off of him, he bolted. He headed straight for courtroom 1, which was actually closed at this time for like redecorating, and he ran past the decorators who were in there. They were very like flustered and shocked when he entered, and he dove headfirst through a window. So this is a bit like Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy did this. However, Ted Bundy had the intelligence to open the window first, whereas Arthur decided that he would just jump through a closed window, which obviously resulted in some injuries from this because of all the glass and obviously the impact. So he jumped through this window and he actually landed in a barbed wire fence. So not only is he getting injured from the window, he also got stuck in a barbed wire fence. He cut his knee open, but after he was able to get free, he then escaped and hid himself in the crowd at Selby and just disappeared. He then just disappeared and went into hiding, and after nearly a month he was in a small town in South Yorkshire called Dore, which was nearly 50 miles from Selby. So he's managed to get a good distance away from where he was to begin with. And Dore is where today's case, the main events of today's case, took place. So as he's walking through the town, he sees a large marquee in the garden of a family. This family was the Leitner's family, and this was on the 22nd of October 1983. So this marquee was in their garden because they had just celebrated their eldest daughter's wedding that same day. So this home belonged to Basil Leitner, who was 59, and his wife, who was a doctor, who was called Avril Leitner, who was 55. The couple were beginning to clear up the celebrations from the day, and their younger daughter, 18-year-old Nicola, and their son, 28-year-old Richard, were helping them to clear up in the marquee as well, and they were just preparing to settle down for the evening. However, Arthur had been on the run for a while and he wasn't able to find regular food, so he was hungry. So he saw this marquee and decided to enter. He was unshaven, filthy, obviously he's living on the streets, and he was still being troubled by the wound on his knee, so he's limping at this point and not very quick on his feet. He then entered the Leitner's house through a faulty patio door, and some people think he was wanting to commit armed robbery on this house to get some money and some of the belongings. However, it was also believed that he was drawn in by the younger daughter, 18-year-old Nicola. The events that followed next would be the most shocking in criminal history at that time. Arthur entered the bedroom that he thought belonged to 18-year-old Nicola. However, he was mistaken, and this bedroom actually belonged to her 28-year-old brother, Richard. Richard had dreams of becoming a doctor, and he had just celebrated, obviously, his sister's wedding that same day. As Arthur had not entered the correct bedroom, he decided to stab Richard repeatedly in the chest and neck and murder him. Richard was found half on and half off his bed, so he had tried to escape this attack. His father, Basil, heard this attack upstairs and went up to investigate what was going on. Arthur then launched an attack on Basil at the top of the stairs and stabbed him, and he fell backwards down the stairs. The next frenzied attack was launched on Avril. and he stabbed her 26 times in her downstairs bedroom. She had really tried to put up like a defense, and a lot of the stab wounds were to her hands and arms. And these stab wounds were actually so deep that you could actually see the bones in her hands. Nicola had heard her family being murdered and had heard the horrendous screams her mother let out as she was being stabbed to death, which must have been just, I can't even imagine it. It must have been horrendous. After the attack on Avril, Arthur then returned back upstairs to focus his attacks on Nicola. He flashed his torch in her face and told her that if she screamed, he would kill her next. And obviously, frightened by this and having seen what he'd already done, Nicola complied. He then went on to savagely rape her at knife point in her bedroom before walking her down the stairs past her family, and she actually ended up walking in the blood of her father, who was still lying dead at the bottom of the stairs. He then took her back out to the marquee and tied her to a chair, and then he went on to boast about how he had killed her family and then savagely raped her again. He then blindfolded Nicola and went on to eat and drink the leftovers from the party that were left in the marquee. He then went and took her back upstairs and raped her again. So this attack must have been horrific for Nicola. As dawn broke, Arthur left Nicola in hysterics, crying on her bed, and he just simply told her to take care and to not suffocate herself with her tears, as she was still bound at this point. He hadn't untied her. Nicola's foot was actually caked in her father's blood still, and her nightdress was stained with her mother's blood that had come off of Arthur's hands as he raped her. It's not actually known why Arthur left Nicola alive and didn't murder her like the rest of her family. So it just seems a bit strange. He'd murdered everyone else and then just left an eyewitness, like, who had physically seen her and could describe what he looked like. I'm not too sure whether this would be like an ego thing, like he thought that he could get away with this, and it was more of like he had a witness who could say what he'd done but didn't know who it was. Maybe, I don't know, it just seemed a bit strange. But as we said, he's not the smartest tool in, or sharpest tool in the shed, as you would put it. The next morning, 2 workmen arrived to take down the marquee from the night before, and they discovered the horrific scene at the house. An investigation was obviously launched straight away, and a manhunt was launched at the same time to try and find who committed these horrendous murders. The most crucial evidence obviously came from Nicola, as she was the only eyewitness left at the scene. However, after obviously suffering the horrendous trauma of losing her whole family, along with the multiple rapes she had had to be subjected to, she was in a state of shock, which is completely understandable. I couldn't imagine what she was going through at this time. However, just 3 days later, Nicola was able to provide some information about the attack and provide a description to a sketch artist within the police to be able to draw up a sketch of who they were looking for. The sketch that was produced just showed a thin man with curly hair and a slightly bent nose. So the police had a rough image of who they were actually looking for. There was a huge amount of forensic evidence left at the scene as well, since Arthur hadn't decided to clean up after himself and he hadn't worn gloves or anything, so he'd left his fingerprints everywhere. There was a bloodstain on Nicola's bedsheet, which had actually come from his knee injury from jumping out of the window at the courthouse. Nicola also informed the police that when they were in the marquee, Arthur had taken a bite from a bit of cheese and he had drunk from a bottle of champagne. So this was very important forensic evidence, but it couldn't be used until a suspect was found. Like, they didn't have a database like we do now. So until an actual suspect was found, they weren't able to identify who this DNA belonged to. A colleague in the North Yorkshire Police was able to actually provide a breakthrough in this case, and he informed the police that the sketch that had been completed looked a lot like the man that had escaped, Arthur Hutchinson. So they compared Arthur Hutchinson's prints to the palm print they had taken from the bloodstains and from the champagne bottle in the marquee, and they were an exact match. So now they knew the man that had committed these murders and who they were looking for. And so a picture was released of Arthur Hutchinson, and the manhunt was on to try and bring him to justice. However, obviously the police had been trying to find Arthur since he escaped the court, so they didn't know where to start. The manhunt at the time was the biggest since the search for the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe. So this was a huge manhunt. And by this time, Arthur had actually crossed the county borders and he was really on the run. After he left the Lakeners house, he had crossed over the county border and had hailed a taxi to Worksop. You think being British I'd be able to pronounce these names, but I can't. Rather than just disappear underground, he decided to go in disguise to these places, and he stayed at guest houses and pubs throughout in places like Barnsley, Nottinghamshire, Manchester, York and Scarborough. When he couldn't stay in one place for the night, he indulged in his love of nature and being outside, and he would sleep in rough dens and shelters that he built. He would then forage food from people's allotments, and apparently he even ate dandelions and roots to survive. Overnight, Arthur had become Britain's most wanted man, but instead of hiding, it seemed that he revelled in this notoriety, and he was very big-headed about all of this. He believed himself to be very cunning and a survival expert, and actually gave himself the nickname of the Fox. He would then write mocking letters to the police and the media, starting all the letters as "I, the Fox." In most of his letters, he sort of like provoked the police and like goaded them that they hadn't found him yet, and that he was the master of disguise and cunning, which obviously probably drove the police crazy. He also denied any of the crimes as well, saying that they were looking for the wrong person, and warned the media to stop reporting on the nationwide hunt for him. He then rang the offices of the Yorkshire Post newspaper and spoke to one of the journalists. In the conversation, he boasted his survival expertise and attempted to portray himself as a criminal mastermind. He claimed that he'd actually been in and out of these search areas that the police had like cornered off, and that he had avoided any detection from the police. He also claimed that he was too smart to be caught, and that he would never be like willing to give himself up. He would always be on the run, and told them that he would always be one step ahead of them. By the time November had arrived, the manhunt for Arthur had no less intensified, and he still couldn't be caught. Police had followed up on over 1,500 possible sightings of him, but they actually had no idea where he had possibly ended up. Ever since they'd worked out the identity of the killer, they had placed surveillance on his mother's house, knowing that he would probably return there to seek her forgiveness in Hartlepool. And the police were counting on this time for being no different, and that he would eventually return to his mother. As a result, the police had actually tapped her phone and were waiting for the Fox to contact his mum. They were also confident that he would try to contact a numerous amount of his female friends. As a result, they also placed 24-hour surveillance on all of these women as well. The police's hunch proved to be right, as at 4 AM on the 4th of November, Arthur made first contact to an unnamed woman before calling his own mother. He told his mother that he was actually coming home, and the police were able to trace his call to a nearby telephone box. He remained at large overnight, and on the 5th of November 1983, the manhunt entered into the final stages. More than 400 police officers and dog handlers entered into a 8-mile search. So they stood shoulder to shoulder and combed over 8 miles of land to try and find Arthur. Throughout all of the arrogant nature of Arthur could not resist showing off and taunting the police, obviously. Suspecting that the police would be listening to his calls, he called the unnamed woman again before calling his mother, and he then proceeded to mock the police for not catching him and going as far as to call them Boy Scouts. Eventually, Arthur was found at 3:45 that day in a turnip field near Middle Stotfold Farm. Arthur was finally cornered and he made his final break for freedom before being brought down by the police dogs. He then threatened police with a knife before stabbing himself, but luckily this was not a fatal stabbing. Under a massive police guard, he was escorted to hospital to get treatment for his injuries and to also be treated for the knee injury that was still playing up from jumping out of that window at the courthouse. The fox was finally caught. After his arrest, the police actually discovered a cassette tape in the Darlington guest house which he had stayed at while trying to hide from police. He had the audacity to sign himself in under the name A. Fox in the guest book. And extracts from the tape were actually published in the media after his trial and conviction. And the extracts are as follows. Because I was able to get this tape recorder transistor, I've been able to listen to everything that's been going on. Where they have been waiting for me, where they have been looking for me. So I knew exactly which way to head out of the way from them. Like playing cat and mouse, or shall I say, fox on the trot. I'm making no comments on the triple killings. Let the police do what they want. I'm saying nout. I'm not telling anybody nothing about that business. Maybe I'm a bit daft in the head like people think I am. Let them think what they want. I'm still free. That's the main fucking thing. However crack as I might be, I've walked past them several times and they haven't even noticed me. Like I said, I'm the master of disguise. He described his escape from the Selby Magistrates Court and he said, I hurled myself through an upper window, crashing into a barbed wire net, ripping my leg to pieces. I ran 4 miles, barely stopping, then stopped in the bushes for hours. Then I see the helicopter hunt. So I dragged myself into the gutter, crawl along the gutter and force myself into bramble bushes. I stay there until it got dark. He then says he spent 4 nights on the run before going to hospital in Doncaster for treatment for this knee wound. Trousers were at the stage covered in blood, but I kept on going. I got my treatment, left and walked another 3 to 4 miles back into the wilderness. You just have to keep continuing sometimes. I just had to live day by day, but I won't give in. I'll never give in, even when they shoot me, else finish me off. So he's still taunting them in these cassettes that they found, the tapes that they found at the guest house. Unsurprisingly, Arthur denied the 3 murders and the repeated rapes of Nicola. However, he was charged on all counts based on the overwhelming evidence that he left at the crime scene. Obviously, his handprints were everywhere, all of that. And he remained in custody until his trial. And his trial was actually quite notable as it was the first trial where a video of the crime scene was actually shown in the courtroom. The 7-minute video shook the jury as it gave a first and visual recreation of the slaughter that had occurred and had happened in the Leitner house. Arthur entered into a plea of not guilty on all accounts. Obviously, he's not going to admit to this, is he? And denied even being in the house, which I don't know how you can do that when your DNA is there, but you know, we love a trier. However, he changed his story when he realised the extent of the evidence that was in the house. Arthur actually had a very, very rare blood type that was only 1 in 50,000 people had this blood type. And the forensic scientist gave compelling evidence in the trial which showed the jury that the blood type was an exact match to Arthur. And this blood had actually been found on Nicola's bed sheets from his knee injury. Blood that had come from the knee wound was obtained from the window at the courthouse. So they were able to match the two together. Also, another forensic scientist testified that the bite marks found in the cheese in the marquee matched Arthur's bite mark, as they'd actually taken an impression while he was in the police custody. There was also the evidence of Arthur's palm prints from the champagne bottle in the marquee itself. And faced with all this evidence, the fox tried to use some of his cunning. He concocted the story that in fact he had been in the house. He got this wrong. He had been there. But he'd actually been invited by Nicola the night before to come into the house. He claimed that he met her in a pub and she had invited him to go back to her house to have sex. And he claimed that she'd actually said that she would leave the patio door open for him so that he could get in, and that he would find a bottle of champagne waiting for him when he arrived. He actually went further to say that he had consensual sex with her and that he then left her, and then the others must have come, so other people must have come and killed the rest of the family. As he pled not guilty, this meant that Nicola had to be called to the stand to testify in this case. She proved to be unshakable and really impressed the jury with how composed she was throughout the trial. Obviously, she's at the trial where the murderer of her family is being tried, so the fact that she was able to keep composure is very, very impressive. She denied Arthur's claims of consensual sex, proving that he raped her, and said that she had not invited him into the house, and she did not leave the patio door open, and she was not willing to have consensual sex with him. The court heard from Nicola that she had pretended out of fear to enjoy the sex with Arthur so that he didn't kill her, which is just horrific that she had to do that. The jury also learned of Arthur's cunning nature and how Arthur had used a Scottish accent throughout to kind of throw her off. She was an impressive witness and proved to be unshakable, and that really impressed the jury. With Arthur's web of lies in tatters, Arthur revelled in all this attention and decided to change his tact and change his story. He claimed next that a reporter from the Sunday Mirror, Mike Barron, had actually committed these murders and pointed to him in the courtroom, saying that he had been the one to commit these murders, and stated, "That's the killer there," as he pointed to him. And he said that he had a vendetta, Mike had a vendetta against him, and that's why he was being accused of all of this. He could not clearly explain, however, why Mr. Barron had been involved in this and why he'd been at the house at the time. The absurd story didn't obviously sway the jury in any way, and they were not deliberating for very long. And after just 4 hours of deliberation, on the 14th of September 1984, Arthur was found guilty on all 3 counts of murders and the repeated rapes of 18-year-old Nicola. He showed no emotion at the trial whatsoever, and he was sentenced to multiple life tariffs, saying that he should serve a minimum sentence of 18 years. However, just 10 months after being jailed, Arthur failed in an appeal against this conviction, and he was left to serve the sentence in Wakefield Prison, where he was actually feared by the fellow inmates of the prison and described by officers as being like a bomb about to reach the end of his fuse at all times. After his conviction, the Home Secretary, Leon Britton, ruled that Arthur's crime deemed too horrific for him to be given an 18-year minimum sentence, and said that life should mean life, and that he would never be released and would die in jail. Since this ruling, he has consistently challenged this decision and has appealed several times against the conviction. In 2008, after serving the minimum he was due to serve, so the 18 years, he went before the High Court judge who ruled that Arthur should never be freed, and undeterred by his appeal again later that year, but his bid for freedom was shattered. He was not given any less of a sentence. They decided life should mean life, as I think it should as well, especially for crimes as horrific as this, and the fact that he didn't even confess to them at all. He still denies them now Arthur was again in the news in 2013 as he became the first British prisoner to appeal against his sentence after the controversial ruling, and said that it was against his human rights for how he was being treated. However, this did not reduce his sentence, and he is still behind bars as one of Britain's longest serving prisoners. Arthur Hutchinson is now 75 years old. He's about to turn 76 this year, and his name still conjures such a horrific image in everyone's mind across Britain. He has never been successful in appealing his full life sentence, and he will never be released. The surviving members of the Door murders have long since moved away under new identities, hoping to be free of the massacres and the murders and the media spotlight, and to put the tragic events behind them. However, every time Arthur appeals his sentence, the murders are brought back up into the media, which is just so horrific for the family. So I hope that he just stops all of this. He's not getting out. He needs to just accept that now. And yeah, the way that he's acting is, he just shows no remorse for anything that he's done, and he's never admitted to any of these murders. But that is the end of today's case about Arthur Hutchinson, aka the Fox. Let me know what you think down below. Do you think his sentence is well deserved? Do you think he should be released? Let me know what you think, and yeah, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed this story. Let me know any other stories you want to hear down below. I will be back next Monday with the next Murderous Minds Monday. We'll see who we cover next week. So if you don't want to miss that, then subscribe down below. But I love you all so much. Stay safe out there, and I will see you next Monday. Bye!